Hey, everybody, it's Rick Wilson. I am delighted to be joined tonight by Stuart Stevens, as always, and also by my dear friend, the amazing writer, the amazing podcaster, the amazing person overall, Molly Jong-Fast, one of the funniest and wittiest people out there in our politics, and a very observant writer and the author of a phenomenal new book called How to Lose Your Mother, coming out in June, which is the story of her and her mother, Erica Jong. It is fascinating, and I think it's going to be a giant hit. So, with that, Molly, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on tonight. I
Well,
appreciate you.
thanks for
Stuart,
having me. Thanks,
Stuart,
thanks.
thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to see you're back from the dead, at least partially.
Well, my voice goes for about 20, 30 minutes, and then it turns into sounding like RFK. But with that, I want to start out with talking to you both about the first decade of the second Trump administration, which occurred over the last week. How do you think it's going so far, Molly?
It's going the way we thought it would go, right? I mean, he's doing everything he told us he would do. Project 2025 is here.
It is, and all the people that said over and over again in both Trump's world and in the mainstream media, oh no, he's denounced it, he's denied it, it's not going to happen, it has nothing to do with Trump. Oh, suddenly, it has everything to do with Trump. And I'm curious. You wrote a piece in the Atlantic, or you were quoted in the Atlantic about talking about how the flood of this whole thing is so overwhelming for people. Talk to me about how when do you think that this initial shock and awe phase can be said to come to an end?
Well, I mean, the question is, will Trump and his people be able to do things that are extra constitutional, right? That's what they call it, or post constitutional.
Mm-hmm.
Will they be able to get away with this? Will people call their senators, call their congresspeople, start marching? When will they say you don't have the power? I mean, look, what's happening here is that Donald Trump wants to get rid of this Nixon era anti-corruption
Right.
law, right? The Impoundment Act of 1974, which
Mm-hmm.
was put into place after Richard Nixon to stop corrupt Republican presidents from doing what they want with the federal money, right?
Right.
Congress is supposed to control the purse, not Donald Trump and his buddies. So this is this plan. They want to get this up to the Supreme Court. That's my take. So that there's either a constitutional crisis, which is fine for them,
Mm-hmm.
or they think maybe they can get their guys to sign off on this. Now, I have real questions. I mean, again, you never underestimate the cowardice of these Republicans, but I still have real questions about whether or not Justice Roberts and Justice Amy sign off on this. But I think that's the goal here, is to try to just make it so Donald Trump controls the purse.
So, Stuart, we are in uncharted territory here with this, but a lot of folks that I was communicating with today about this, including a very conservative Federalist Society lawyer who I reached out to, and I just said,
Yeah,
this impoundment question is real. And he said, it's not real. It's a 9-0 vote against Trump.
Right.
It's black letter law, and just like and birthright citizenship is black letter law in the Constitution. It's going to be a 9-0 blowout against him. And I felt like he was being a little optimistic. What are your thoughts on like Trump is going to have setbacks, and he's going to have them soon? What do you think about like where it breaks for him first?
well, look, I thought that Jonathan Laster wrote a great piece about this that you highlighted in the Bulwark. We're saying that the Supreme Court is a political entity. Roberts is a very political Chief Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go into these decisions and Trump is popular, right now he's at 47% favorable, as high as he's ever been. They are more likely to look favorably on anything than if the guy's 20 points to the bad.
Right.
They would rather go along with a popular president than try to rescue a sinking presidency, which goes to, I think, in our other life, in the Lincoln Project, one of our goals is to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But, I am I am firmly of the opinion that you had a presidential election in which the job approval of the president was 40. Post-war, incumbent parties always gotten within 2 points. So the Harris campaign did a lot better than normal. You had favorable right track for the country about 27, 28%. No incumbent party has ever won when it was under 45. So a challenger won. I think a generic challenger probably would have won this. And I think that is being confused, certainly by Trump world for understandable reasons, but also a lot in the media for it being a mandate for Trump. So it's not. And Trumpism. Trump is the second most, Trump in January, at this moment, in his first term, is the second most unpopular president in the modern era. The most unpopular was Trump in 2017 at this point. So, you know, I think this is a high watermark of Trumpism. To me, it's their Pickett's charge, and this is as far as they get. Because I think that the majority of people really don't want to send their sons and daughters to die for Greenland. They aren't really interested in going to war with countries like Canada or Mexico. I think people like federal spending. This is why we have a deficit. And you start cutting all this stuff, and it's going to really hurt people and hurt a lot of various political sinners in America. So, you know, and you've got a bunch of buffoons that are going to, buffoon running the largest organization in the world, Defense Department. So, I think the Democrats need to be more aggressive and more organized and more coherent about this. But I don't think that the future for Trumpism looks very good here.
I love optimism, Stuart. You know that. I'm always bit on the ass when I look at these Republicans, though. But I did another optimistic point I saw last week was I have a theory of the case that Pete Hegseth was the high watermark for Trump asking people to get on the bonfire. Molly, when you see coming up this week, we've got Kash Patel, we've got RFK Jr., and we've got, of course, Tulsi Gabbard coming up on for confirmations. What are your thoughts on where they stand? They all look more tenuous than Hegseth did. And I think the fact that because none of them is a Fox News host, he's not going to go to the mattresses quite as hard for them.
I tend to get in a lot of trouble when I predict things like that. So I'm not going to get anywhere near that. But I will say, if you're going to look at what we just saw, I think Mitch McConnell voting against a nominee is meaningful because he's not just some rando, right? He's not some backbencher. Mitch McConnell is very much, even if he's not the leader of the party, he is very much involved in the leadership. Sure. So what I was told last week by someone who was involved in this was that it seemed like Tillis was going to vote no until he had that meeting, that 2-hour meeting with the Sherpas of Pete Hegseth, many of whom are pretty intense group, very pretty, if anyone would, that group is significantly scarier than the Sherpa group for the other people who are coming up.
Folks, a Sherpa, just as a quick aside, having been a former Sherpa, is somebody who walks a nominee for a high office or high appointment through with the Senate, who takes them around to the various members and makes sure that those people have their questions addressed. If it not in the room, then after.
So
I'm sorry, Molly, go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't know what they told Tillis in that room for 2.5 hours, but whatever they told him got him voting the way they wanted, right? And, Tillis is up in 26, so maybe he was worried about a primary, maybe he was worried about, there are a lot of times that we've seen Republicans roll over because they were scared of whatever was being told to them from Trump world. But so, there's evidence to support, if you lost Mitch McConnell and Collins and Murkowski, you only need one more, right? Yeah. And especially when you think about someone like RFK, who has, there are 5 doctors in the Senate, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think that Rand Paul is perhaps, but there are definitely doctors in the Senate. I'm not convinced that you don't lose those doctors when you get RFK up there. I think, we'll see what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if that, but I can't even get
Stuart, you and I have been around this block a number of times. I cannot think of a stranger, more off-putting, more dangerous nominee than RFK Jr. Is there anybody in your memory who is look, and I came in when John Tower, who'd had a few cocktails, couldn't get nominated, right? Talk to me about where you think the RFK vulnerabilities are with this group of folks.
I think the guys against the polio vaccine. The idea that we're even talking about this is insane. The guy is a tragic figure in American life, but he clearly is unbalanced. Decade plus heroin addict, a guy who has abused steroids out the wazoo. I say that as someone who has written about steroids a good bit. His own family was so moved by his danger that they held a press conference warning the country about him. So he's a nut. And look, my theory about this, to the extent theory is probably a grandiose way to put it, but I think Trump knows that Hexet's a buffoon. I think he knows that RFK is nuts. But what he wants to do is he wants to force these senators to prove that they will do whatever he says. It's sort of like, can I come up with something that is so humiliating and so debasing that you will say no? And the answer is, well, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, you're going to go along with that? People like Roger Wicker. Roger Wicker, senator from Mississippi, a guy I've known, we were pages together in Washington, for Christ's sake, worked in his campaigns. He wouldn't hire Pete Hegseth to cut his lawn. No exaggeration. A guy shows up drinking, all these weird tattoos, has problems with women. You don't want a guy like that around the house. And yet, he shepherds this guy through. And so I think this is a way that Trump proves that he has power over these people. It's like Saddam making families of those he's assassinated pay for the bullet.
Right.
And, you think about a guy like, if he gets there, the people who are going to die and be hurt the most by this are those who are on the lower economic spectrum. It's people who aren't going to dentists a lot that really need fluoridated water. There's people who are not have regular contact with a physician, that mandatory school vaccines are so useful because it is a public way of guiding health. And I think your average kid who's going to Exeter is going to get vaccinated, whether or not it's the law or not, because their parents are going to make sure they get vaccinated. So I don't know. I can't imagine this guy getting past. I can't imagine Tulsi Gabbard getting through. Probably Kash Patel will.
So that's the wild card question. And I wanted to ask you about this, Molly. Of the three of them, Kash Patel is the one guy who is in the most dangerous political assignment of them for domestic politics. And I'm curious, what do you think Patel's chances look like right now? I think he's got a better than average shot at the moment in the Senate. What are you hearing? What are you thinking about our friend Kash Patel?
I have no insight into the Kash Patel fiasco. I mean, I certainly think that as a person who, it certainly makes me anxious. I mean, it's, but I don't have a sense of where he stands on this. And I think with this situation, like Republicans have tended to be really cowardly when it's come to standing up against Trump, which is how we got here. But I'm not, I hate to, I think like the real enemy here is being cynical because we're in such a high stakes moment in American life, right? If we assume that Trump world will do the worst possible thing, then we're sort of giving them the cover to do it. So personally, I would like to assume that at some point the Senate will take their Article 2 responsibilities seriously. Mm-hmm. And I also would love them to realize that like Patel is planning on making the FBI he'll make Hoover look like Lincoln. Right. I mean, that's what we're looking at here.
So Molly, if you were advising the Democrats on how to handle these nominations, how do you think they've done so far? And what would your counsel to them be in terms of, because you are the lifetime real deal Democrat of the group here tonight. What would you want to see out of them differently, or what do you think they've done well on? What do you think that you'd like them to do differently?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would like them to do, and this is maybe controversial, but for example, they put Jerry Connolly as the head of oversight. Jerry Connolly is older, he's sick, and he's a good guy, and they said it was his turn and he deserved it. Right. But AOC has 20 million people who follow her on Instagram. So if you have a problem like the possible shutdown of the federal government, illegal, extra constitutional, whatever it is, you need to get in front of as many people as possible. Wouldn't AOC with her 20 million, because it's not like those 21 million people are like, what is Jerry Connolly up to? Right. I need to know what is he making dinner tonight? Is he, and this is not to say that I don't love, this is not, Democrats have a real communication problem, right? I mean, that's it. They need to be able to get out there, right? I've sat on so many a cable TV set and said, well, this legislature is good, but will voters ever see it? And the answer to the 2024 election was no. No. The voters did not see the legislation. They did not vote on chips and sciences. They did not vote on expanded health care and Medicare expansion. They didn't vote on that. They voted because Donald Trump had sneakers and was going to build a wall and was going to take stuff away from people they didn't like. Right. So now the question is, we know Democrats can't communicate this very good legislation. So how are they going to do it? And I think the ones that have the communication infrastructure are people like AOC and the other Democrats to a certain extent. But AOC and Bernie have, for whatever reason, have a real presence when it comes to communicating. There are others too. That those people need to go everywhere, and they need to go on shows like Joe Rogan and say, you voted for Trump and you live in Nebraska and he's going to cut the federal funding. So tomorrow Head Start will not be happening, and it won't be happening because Donald Trump impounded the federal funds. Right. Like, people aren't going to know this is happening unless Democrats narrate it, because there's no large mainstream media anymore, right? People don't even get their news that way anyway. It is a totally different world, and Donald Trump has yet again been able to capitalize on it.
Stuart?
Look, I think Molly's exactly right. It's particularly ironic because if you look at the talent in the Democratic Party, it is much higher quality political talent than it is in the Republican Party.
Right?
Yep.
It's so frustrating. I mean, we how many times did we beat our heads against the keyboard when they couldn't publicize correctly what they'd done with infrastructure?
Right.
I mean, building a school, building a road, building a new water system, building a bridge. This isn't complicated. This isn't stuff that should be difficult to explain. And you ought to be able to go out and say, and all these Republicans, they ran on this piece of legislation that they voted against.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they got away with it. So, I think part of the problem with Democrats is that they are politicking like they are governing. When you govern, you do have to appreciate, you should, that you represent the whole country. Even the people who didn't vote for you are never going to vote for you. I get that. That's right. That's how it's supposed to work.
Sure.
But they shouldn't be politicking trying to reach these Trump people because they're never going to reach them.
No,
they
they're
should
impossible.
be about motivating their side, which is the majority side.
Right. But I just want to point out, Democrats in this election made the case that they could appeal to Liz Cheney and to the disaffected Republicans. And it turned out that whether or not this was intentional, they did actually alienate their base, and their base just stayed home. So there is a real question about whether or not, at what point do Democrats ever try to appeal to their base when they're running? There were legislative overtures towards the base, but there was no campaigning with the base, or there wasn't the kind of campaigning with the base that might have threaded the needle.
Yeah. Well, I think they really need to just wake up every day with the conviction that they should voice that we're right, they're wrong, that we are the majority of the country, and what these people are trying to do is bad for you. This is going to make your life more difficult. And, if you look around now, there's all these meetings that these Democrats are having where they're asking themselves what went wrong, look, you lost an election. That doesn't mean that you were wrong. It means you lost an election. And they have this tremendous amount of money and resources and power. And I think if they should just quit this questioning and get about the asserting, it would be people follow strength. They follow confidence. They follow conviction. And I just think they ought to be out there attacking more. And I think one of the things about Bernie and AOC is they do have conviction. I mean, Bernie has had the same philosophy of government since he was running, before he was running for mayor of Burlington.
In Mesopotamia.
For 8 votes,
But
they called him Red Bernie.
But you do also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you do also see that Democrats that they have to gum up the works the way that that we saw Tuberville do that. They can do things. They can refuse to be in session. They don't have to vote on Russ Vought on Thursday. They don't have, they can do, there are all sorts of weird procedural things in the Senate that Democrats can do that will make Republicans crazy. And if Republicans are going to ignore the law, and I'm not saying anyone should do anything illegal, though Republicans are technically, if they do what we think they're going to do with Russ Vought, they are going to ignore the law. There really is an opportunity here for Democrats to fight back in the way a Republican might. Obviously, everyone should follow the law. So.
This is why the Lincoln Project exists. To try to show them a way and to be able to do what they are tied up for reasons that internal politics can't do. They show glimmers of this, I think. If you look at Harris's acceptance speech, it was an embrace of patriotism. It was an embrace of big picture sort of Americana. So that's how you do this. That's what you need to do. You have to make voting for Pete Hegseth is unpatriotic. It is what Putin wants. It is what Kim Jong-un wants. It's what the Ayatollah wants. They want an idiot leaving the American military. So I think they ought to be using patriotism. Use the P word. They ought to be saying, if you vote for this guy, you're not a patriot. They ought to be saying that to Pete Hegseth. You're not a patriot.
Yeah.
Challenge him on the principles here.
So, Stuart, I think that approach is. We've said to some of our Democratic friends occasionally, like, look, care like the Democrats care, but fight like the Republicans fight.
Yep.
This is a world now where, and I think, Molly, your point about having people like AOC more front and center, people who understand the new terrain of social media, who understand the new terrain of communications. I just think that is a really important observation because, that little anecdote that came out last week about the Democrats were so pleased about a viral video of somebody making a tuna melt was that it's like, kill me now. What are you talking about? They need people who can connect, at the gut level, which, I don't have to agree with AOC and everything, but she certainly has that ability to really motivate her very, very large audience when she comes out and says, hey, folks, here's an important thing.
And it's not meant to be, I would say it's not ideological, right? All of these Democrats are not so different from each other. And it's ultimately a question of where are the people that you can connect with?
Right.
Where are the voters? And, are they listening to Jerry Connolly? And if not, who are they listening to? And I use that as an example because it's not that, I do think AOC is a more effective speaker, but it's more also just the question of how do you connect with voters? And what we see with a lot of these older members of the legislature, as much as we love them, is that they don't have the same ability to connect, and they don't have the same. If it were still that everybody read a newspaper and everybody watched the evening news together, and we all had a shared reality, then you could absolutely say this kind of thing. But that's not where we live at this moment. We live in this very fractured media world.
Well, Molly, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. As always, folks, every week Molly hosts the fabulous Fast Politics podcast, which I am honored to be the Monday guest as a general rule. Tell folks where else they can read your writings and catch you, Molly.
So my podcast is on Apple Podcasts, and it's on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
The hardest working woman in show business.
I publish in Vanity Fair once a week. And I have a book coming out in June. So,
and you can catch her on MSNBC almost every morning. So,
thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Molly. We really appreciate you as always. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank
folks. Enjoyed having you with us tonight, and I'm glad to be back in the saddle. Listen, do us a big favor, like and subscribe to the various products from Resolute. I've got the enemies list. Joe Trippi has that Trippi show. My Amaze Punching Up is brand new and fantastic, by the way. Decoding Fox News, and of course the Lincoln Project podcast. We have a lot of ways for you to get news in a way that hopefully will give you some optimism and some hope and a sense of fighting spirit as we go forward. Thank you, Stuart, for joining me as always.
Thank you,
brother.
We'll
see you guys again next week.